Hi, I am Jyn Yates. Welcome to LRS102.com's Jyneration Nation on LRS102.com. I'm so pumped today because I have one of my favorite drummers on the show, Mr. Daniel Glass, calling in from New York City. How are you doing today?
Jen's great. I'm great. Good to be here and good to talk to another human being since we're all locked inside all day, you know?
Yes, and man, I have to tell you, you're one of my favorites. I use your teaching online videos all the time. I watch everything you do. I'm a huge fan of your jazz plan and your jazz group. And I've just been a big fan for a long time. So I was really excited to get to interview you today.
Yeah, well, we've sort of been in touch. I first saw you because you're on the cover of the Women Drummers book. I don't know the exact title. What's the exact title?
It's called Women Drummers, A History from Rock to Jazz to Blues to Country.
Awesome. Yeah. So there you're like in mid motion, your hair
Yeah.
is flailing, you know.
I know it's funny. A lot of people don't even know that's me because every picture that I get taken that ends up on a major publication has my hair in front of my face.
Oh, well, yeah, you're going to gotta work on that.
I know. If you notice nowadays, I'm putting it up in the bun and putting the do-rag on, and I like to wear hats to keep my hair out of my face because
Yeah.
when I play, I sweat a lot and the hair sticks to my face, which drives me crazy because your hands are busy. You can't really do a whole lot. So
I remember the good old days of when I first became a musician and I grew my hair long and I had those problems. I'd be chewing a piece of gum and in the middle of the show, the hair would get stuck in the gum. You know, oh God.
Yeah, that's
unfortunately, these days I don't have that problem because my hair just seems to be disappearing all on its own. So
understand that.
I wear a lot of hats too, but for different reasons.
Right. Well, I've got all kinds of great questions today. I love to talk drums. Obviously, I'm a drum geek just like you. And a little history about myself. I grew up, my dad was already touring when he was a kid. So he is a vintage Ludwig Rogers Slingerland collector.
Nice.
And so I grew up with a love for vintage drums as well as tunings and different styles. And the history part I really love because history of drums has always been one of the most fascinating things to me. And we'll talk in a few about some pieces that we have here that nobody seems to know what they're worth or where they came from, kind of thing. So I want to talk about your career, obviously, and how you got your start. What was it that made you want to pursue music and drums?
I think I'm just one of those people that it was built into my DNA. I got into the pots and pans and started whacking away on things at a very young age. And then I was fortunate because my mom she at one period in her life, she was a professional modern dancer before I was born, really. And so she encouraged us to pursue, my sister and I, to pursue our artistic interests. So I started taking lessons when I was 7, which was, pretty young. I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii, of all strange places.
Oh, wow.
So I studied with the principal percussionist of the Honolulu Symphony. And I did that for 5 years, snare drum and timpani. I was also, after 5 years, I sort of demanded that I get a drum set, and my parents obliged, thankfully.
Yeah.
I joined rock bands when I was 12. I was in a Sabbath cover band when I was 12 years old.
Oh, super cool.
It was amazing. I was really into Sabbath at that time. So I was in the 8th grade already playing with ninth graders, which was pretty cool.
I'm a big fan of Bill Ward. I love him too.
Oh yeah, great.
Lots of young teenagers still want to learn Ozzy and Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time I went and got a proper bachelor's degree in psychology, and I realized that I wasn't interested in that after 4 years, but I continued to play. And so I decided to go to music school, and it took me a couple of years to get all that together. But I wound up in LA in my early 20s. I went to a place called the Dick Grove School of Music, and after that, there was no turning back. So
Wow. So you've been all over the place. I would think starting with the Honolulu Symphony would be amazing. I mean, not everybody gets to just start out like that, you know?
Well, I wasn't playing in the symphony. My teacher was in the
Yeah.
symphony. So
But
she
still
was
super
pretty
cool.
old school and, very like, very
Hmm.
serious. And
Hmm.
um, she was not at all about the drum set. So it took me a few years to find some drum set mentors. But yeah, I feel lucky because especially, my parents were very encouraging. They let me have a drum set in the house and let me be in bands and all those kind of things. They didn't stop me from pursuing my interest. And of course, I was sort of like, I never really took it all that seriously. And then when I graduated from college, I went to a university in the Boston area, and there's a lot of colleges there. um, I studied with a guy named Bob Galati, who just passed away a couple months ago. But he had studied with Alan Dawson at Berkeley, and in the early and mid '70s, when people like Steve Smith and Vinnie Colaiuta and Pat Metheny were at Berkeley, and he studied, with all these folks, and so he was the first like real serious professional drummer that I'd ever met.
Yeah.
Me being just fresh out of college, and I was going to stay in Boston for the summer, so I spent 5 months studying with him. And he was the first guy to like that used the term cat when referring to a musician.
Yeah.
Like I
Like a
never,
cool cat.
I didn't think you did that. Like, wow, this cat that cat did that, and I was just like, is this real? Can this really? I mean, like, people don't talk like this. No way.
Was
But
he a
after,
jazz? I have a question about that. Was he a jazz cat? Was he
oh,
a jazz
totally, he
cat?
was a jazz cat. He smoked weed. The way I even met him was that my roommate in college sold weed to him. Like, you got to come see this amazing drummer. He was a free jazz drummer, but
Yeah.
really well respected in the Boston area. Tremendous player, and he did rock stuff and all kinds of stuff, and wasn't just jazz. And so,
Yeah.
anyway, once I spent 5 months with this guy, and I it was a summer, and I was working, but I had time. I that's when I started like 4 and 5 hour practice sessions, and I just was like, I'm not going to do anything else with my life. I'm doing this. I don't care
Yeah.
what the consequences are. So, but yeah, it's been a good run, and I felt like because I didn't even arrive in LA and go to music school till I was 24, I didn't get out till I was about 25. I felt like I was behind the curve, and so I've been like working double time ever since to catch up.
Yeah. I think you've caught up.
I don't
I
know.
was.
Sometimes I still feel like I'm trying to catch up, but
I know.
it's good. It's good to have that fire under your butt, as I'm sure you.
Yeah, well, I was going to give you a little bit about the history of me just because we are talking, we've got an hour. So, I grew up with a dad who was already playing drum set and kind of touring around the state.
Yeah.
And he put me on a kit and just handed me, drumsticks. And I think one of the first memories that I remember learning, may be different from his, but was the 5-stroke roll. And by the time I was really young, I was already, working those 5-stroke rolls out, a lot of the rudiments. My dad was a marching band guy.
Oh,
So
cool.
yeah, he marched snare for a long time, but he was playing in rock and roll bands in the 70s. And there was
Yeah.
a pretty famous band out of Kentucky called Exile that he ended up getting to open for multiple different gigs around the state and stuff like that. So he was already touring when he was like 10, 11, 12,
It must have been so cool for you because I remember when I was young, kind of seeing my first bands. Like, my parents would take me to a party out in the yard. There'd be
Yeah.
a band set up, and I would just sit there watching the drummer the whole time, and I was just
Yeah.
amazed, to see it up close. Right? You hear
Yeah.
things on the radio, or you see things on TV, but like to actually see it, and I just sit there
Yeah.
absorbing.
Well, and you'll love this because you're putting out the thing on shuffles. Well, I cut my teeth on shuffles right
Awesome.
away because where I'm from, if you didn't play country music or Southern rock, then you
Right.
didn't have any gigs. I hadn't even
Right.
heard of jazz yet until I got into band in school. So
Yeah.
I remember being really young, and we have a pretty famous songwriter that is from the next county over named Steve Warner. And Steve Warner is a Nashville cat who wrote a lot of hits for Garth Brooks and a lot of these. He also had his own great career in the 80s and had a ton of hits. But they would have his cousin was his steel guitar player, and he ran the local music shop here. So I would go over, they would have these like steel guitar conventions, and steel guitarists would come in from all over the world, and they would play for hours and hours and hours. Well, when the drummers got tired, they'd just set me up on a throne and be like, here, learn this shuffle, and play it as long as you can. And then they would go party, and here I was like trying to figure it out, So
Cool.
I got my teeth cut on that very early.
Awesome. Speaking of shuffles, I do want to interject this early in the conversation because this is definitely what I'm doing right now, and it's actually a pretty cool thing. You and I both have been in the world of online teaching for quite a while now.
Yeah.
I've been doing it for probably almost 10 years. I was probably one of the first drummers to really embrace it online, and so thankfully, over time, I've developed a pretty strong Skype, online teaching practice, and with the advent of the COVID and COVID-19 and the pandemic and the lockdown, now everybody's scrambling to do that. But thankfully,
right.
I have sort of had that operational already. But one thing that I'm trying to sort of do to take that to the next level is to create some online courses where, I don't have to just do a one-on-one. I could teach many people all at once and be able to kind of share the knowledge more broadly. So I'd already been working on one of those courses when the whole thing happened. And so the first 3 weeks we were all in lockdown, I was just editing madly and putting this whole thing together. And one of the things, that I thought is, everybody is locked down right now. All these drummers have lost their gigs. Nobody can rehearse. Nobody can play. And people are hurting financially. So I thought, well, for a limited time, why don't I offer this shuffles course for free? And so the course is about shuffles, which is one of my favorite subjects. And it's very interesting how I came to be so into shuffles is that my first actual professional band, which was out of LA about a year and a half after I got out of music school, my first tours and things like that were with a female blues guitarist named Debbie Davies. And Debbie isn't all that well known. She's an awesome lead guitar player, singer, but she had worked with Albert Collins, who was one of the giants of the blues, kind of the B.B. King, Freddie King era.
Yeah.
And so, interestingly, I got hired on that gig. I worked with those guys for about a month, and then I got fired. And I'm really grateful to her because what she said, she was honest. Normally, in the music business, a lot of times people don't call you back, and they're just like, it's not working out, or we're going another direction. They don't give you any specific feedback. And she said to me, your shuffle is just not strong enough, because she was a blues guitar player. I mean, and as we all know, the blues, you better have your shuffle together. And I was young. I could play a shuffle, but I didn't know that much about it. So ironically, it seems like ever since I got fired from that gig, my whole career has been about gigs where I have to play shuffles. And
right.
in a way, so then, the following year, 1994, I got the opportunity to be involved with this band, Royal Crown Review, which now is a band that a lot of people know me for.
Right.
And that was another band where we were playing a lot of rhythm and blues and, different styles and lots of different kinds of shuffles. And again, I was a much better drummer by that point, but they were like, hey man, you got to learn these styles of music. You got to be able to play this groove, better. So then I started really getting into it. And eventually I got so excited about the earlier styles of music we were playing, sort of rhythm and blues and rockabilly and early rock and roll and swing and, traditional jazz. We sort of covered a whole lot of areas that I ended up starting to interview a lot of the old school pioneer drummers that had originally created these grooves. And I began to really, really dig in. And then I met Zorro. I don't know if you probably know who Zorro is.
Yes, I love Zorro.
Drummer. And he had written a book called The Commandments of R&B Drumming. And I said, well, why don't I write a book? And he and I ended up working on it together. We spent quite a few years developing it. And at the end, we had this book called The Commandments of Early Rhythm and Blues Drumming, which really is the Shuffle's Bible. It's a 152-page book. It covers a lot of decades of evolution of the shuffle in the context of a lot of different styles of music. So then over time, I started doing more clinics and, traveling and I created a shuffles clinic because one of the things that most drummers don't realize is that shuffles aren't just for blues drummers or not just for jazz drummers.
Right.
Shuffles are in every single style of music that we play, period.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, they are everywhere. And especially if you're playing in a classic rock band, like you were saying, or a country band, a reggae band, if you play gospel chops, if you play funk, if you play hip hop, if you play, you know, any country, you know, any of these styles of music, the thing is the shuffle always separates the wheat from the chaff, right?
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, the women from the girls, as it were. It's like, if you can play a shuffle, you're going to be much more employable. If you can't play a shuffle, then immediately people are like, okay, that's one of those kind of drummers. And if it's a higher level or you're trying to get to that next level, it's real important. And the other thing that I learned in working on the book is that the more that I practiced shuffles, the better that my straight eighth drumming became. So, you know, because you have to negotiate that uneven long, short, long, short, long of the shuffle, better you have control over that. When you go back to playing straight eights, all of a sudden you have much greater clarity there as well. So my first online course is all about shuffles. As you probably know, because you're a teacher and you're around a lot of musicians, shuffles are often the weakest part of a drummer's playing, of a drummer's repertoire. You know, I've seen great drummers completely fall apart as soon as they have to play a shuffle, or it sounds terrible.
Yeah.
Most drummers don't understand the concept of how to get that flow going with one motion, ba 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 ba, and they try to play ba 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 and play every single stroke, which is never going to work.
Right.
So I put all this together in an online course, and as I said, I'm making it completely free. And it's got 6 modules. Each module has 5 or 6 videos in it. The whole thing is probably several hours, and there's downloadable PDFs and just tons and tons of cool stuff. Every day that you don't get a module, like there's a 24-hour wait in between the modules because it's all delivered to you automatically. So you can practice a little bit. You know, I stagger them, but on those days where, where I'm not giving a module from the course, that I'm sending you an email with some really cool thing that ties into what we're doing in the course. So one day, for example, I talk about this exercise that I teach everyone called the throw up exercise, which is a great name.
I love that.
About creating and finding the pulse, which is another important aspect to shuffles that a lot of drummers don't really understand how to get. And then the next day you get an email where I show a video of John Bonham. Lo and behold, 1969 with Led Zeppelin, playing a shuffle and using this exact throw-up technique. So it's like, okay, John Bonham was using that. You know, then a couple days later, I talk about Bernard Purdy. A couple days later, I post some Jeff Porcaro stuff. A couple days, you know. So I try to
three of my all-time favorites, especially Purdy. I'm a huge Purdy head.
Oh, yeah. So, you know, the idea is to not just, I think part of the problem with drum education today, and not to get too into it, but it's more like, if you want to play this style or this pattern, here's stuff you can do with your limbs. Everything is like patterns. And there isn't very much context that sort of explains why we're supposed to make these different styles sound this way, or how we can, you know, how do we change, you know, set up our technique so we can achieve the right feel. So, you know, I like to call that the why behind the what. You know, or the how behind the what. And that's what I'm trying to do in this course. So it's just been an amazing experience. I launched it 4 days ago.
Where can we find that online? Like, if listeners are listening and they are interested in taking this.
If they want to take it, they should just go to my website, danielglass.com. One word, Daniel Glass, DANIELGLASS.com. And right on the front page of the website, there's a link where they can go to register. And it's a you know, the feedback has just been unbelievable. I'm closing in on 1,000 people already registering.
I was gonna say, I mean, just from my experience, every time I watch a video of yours, I'm just obsessed. You know what I mean? You've taught me so much, you probably don't even know.
Oh, thank you.
But just from your online videos, I was a big fan of those Vic. Did you do them for Vic Firth, the history of the those I literally almost made mandatory viewing for most of my older students, because a lot of them didn't know, certain things about drums or the history, or that wire brushes came from old fly swatters, and just it's just fascinating to me to watch. You give all this history, and shuffles. Yes, one of the hardest things that I have found from the students learning is shuffles, and I try to explain. And I'm not the best teacher in the world. I'm just going off of experience and having some really great instructors in my life.
Yeah.
But I usually teach that, from the get-go, a song is either going to have a straight feel or it's going to have a swung feel. And there's really no other option to have. So we talk a lot about the shuffles, and people do tend to struggle with those. One thing I wanted to ask you, this was a fascinating question that I got.
Yeah. No, go ahead.
About a shuffle, is that I worked for a guy named Marvin Maxwell, and he's kind of known as the Hal Blaine of Louisville. He's been playing since the 50s. He toured with Dick Clark's Caravana tours, and he's done some amazing things. Well, he started the first drum shop in Louisville in the late 70s, and they started rock school right away. And this was well before rock school was ever around. In fact, I'm pretty sure that if they trace the history back, that he would have probably been one of the inventors of that.
That's cool. Because judging from what he did as a drummer, he was actually probably on the first generation of guys that were getting hired to play rock and considered themselves rock drummers. Considered themselves rock drummers, because the earliest inventors of rock were all jazz guys or blues guys who were playing swing and shuffles. And they said, okay, well, I'll make this fit into what Little Richard is doing, or what Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry are doing.
Right.
But then within a few years, the drummers that were influenced by those artists just said, I'm a rock drummer, which was a totally new concept.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, he has a lot of theories that are just mind blowing to me about all the drummers when they came into Nashville from LA in the 70s, that he claims that brought rock and roll into country music, which today, if we listen to country music, it's basic rock beats behind them, But one thing that he educated me on is all the different types of shuffles and the different areas that they come from, like the Texas shuffle, versus the Chicago shuffle versus the jazz shuffle. And he claims that there is one called the Cincinnati shuffle that's really rare. And I had never heard of this. And I've done research, and I've not been able to find anything on it. So I was curious if you have ever heard of a Cincinnati shuffle.
Well, so I actually have a section in my book, the Shuffles book, which is called It's All in a Name. And I absolutely talk about this in the Shuffles course as well. And it's sort of, where you live in Kentucky and where you grew up, your teacher, Mr. Maxwell, defined a Chicago shuffle as X, and a Texas shuffle as Y, and a Cincinnati shuffle as Z.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to go to Cincinnati, those same three shuffles are probably there, but they probably have different names.
Right.
Because, so it just all, because it's sort of like an oral history, everybody learned it from their mentor or their teacher or somebody in their area. And so these things just kind of travel down over time.
Right.
So in my opinion, because I've done a lot of research, I've interviewed a lot of drummers, and the way I like to think about this is it's more how you should name a shuffle is what's going on in the shuffle.
I agree. Yeah, so absolutely.
I would love to see at some point, maybe you could demonstrate the Cincinnati shuffle for me. And I could tell you, probably I talk about it in the book, and I would call it something else that was maybe a little more generic. Now, where I bring in the regions of the country, because in my book I talk a lot about Chicago, a lot about Texas, a lot about certainly, Cincinnati was cool because you had King Records.
Yes.
And Cincinnati is literally, people don't realize, but Cincinnati's on the border with Kentucky. Like, it's almost in the South.
Oh, yeah.
And so what's cool about King Records in Cincinnati was that they would put out rhythm and blues records for the African-American audience. They'd put out country records for the white audience. They put out gospel records for the religious audience. And they would just recut all the same tunes with a different flavor to it, and that would be considered a different style. But anyway, so the regions are really rich and they have a great history. So the way I sort of determined about how I would refer to Chicago blues, for example, is more what were the artists that recorded, the important artists that recorded in Chicago at that time?
Right.
What kind of grooves were they playing? And on those records. And I would try to pick some kind of unique sounding grooves. But I wouldn't say this is a Texas shuffle. I would say this kind of a groove is associated with Texas blues from this era, you know?
Right.
Now, but it's certainly, I mean, you can't, with so many people playing shuffles in the 40s and 50s, because shuffles was the basic bread and butter beat right before rock and roll came in and straightened things out and added more backbeat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I would assume in every city, every version of the shuffle was happening in some way or another.
Oh, guaranteed. Yeah. And I have fun fact for you. You'll love this. My first cousin, he's been gone for many years. He was a bouncer for Muddy Waters in Southside Chicago.
Oh, wow.
So
Amazing.
we have a lot of musical history on the Yates side of the family. I definitely got it honest and through my blood, you know.
That's awesome.
My dad was like the marching guy, but he was mostly, you know, he was into rock and roll, all the early psychedelic stuff. So I kind of would cut my teeth on that, as well as country music. And then did your dad play In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida? I'm sure he did. I'm sure he's played it a bunch.
Love that tune.
Me too. I love all that. You know, I'm a big fan of any great drummer or any great band. I'm a really big fan of. But it wasn't until, you know, middle school band, I actually played clarinet, saxophone, and learned to read melody lines. And we played jazz. And then I was in charge of the pit orchestra for a long time. So I did marimbas and timpanis like you're talking about. We played all the wacky stuff. Ever since then, I kept getting labeled as a rock drummer because I've always put out original records, and rock was always kind of my thing, and I just found it fun. But I toured with a blues group out of Cincinnati. I was going to tell you this. And similar to you, an older female blues guitarist named Kelly Ritchie, who had worked with Albert King. And we did about 170 shows on the road in 9 months. So I got my touring in right away, and my chops got very solid because of, you know, playing 3-4 hours every night, really high energy, blues, funk, rock. And then my bass player, who I'm still great friends with, his name is Freak Bass. Well, he studied under Bootsy Collins, and they're all from Cincinnati, and I ended up getting to tour with a guy named Razor Sharp.
I love that.
Yeah, who was in Bootsy's rubber band, and he also was in Parliament. He was their keyboard player, so they educated me on everything funk, coming out of Dayton, he educated me on records, and of course I had studied James Brown's two drummers for years, because I was a huge fan of their stuff. So I got a lot of experience right away, you know, in Cincinnati in my early 30s. That was so. But
that's
we were
cool.
Man,
the Ohio, you know, the Ohio players, man, they were out of Cincinnati, or Columbus,
Dayton,
Columbus,
Dayton. Yeah.
So many American cities have incredible regional histories, and great stuff came out of those cities. You know, jazz stuff or rock stuff, funk stuff. It's cool. You know. So,
by the way, about the that Cincinnati shuffle, I think it's going to be more comparable to the backdoor shuffle, what they call. Yeah, and you know, when I teach shuffles, I like to teach it on paper because I'm a very fluent reader because I do a lot of theater and orchestra, and sometimes they'll hand you 200 pages of a Sondheim piece, and then you might have a week to rehearse and maybe 1 or 2 run-throughs, and then you're thrown to the wolves. You know, it's like Broadway, off Broadway, basically.
Sure.
And I've been fortunate. I've toured more with theater than I have with bands. But it's kept my reading chops really great, you know. So I feel like I kind of had a heads up in teaching drum set and snare drum notation because, you know, I didn't start out that way. I started out reading melody lines, but I taught so much that literally I would collect every book I could find. I would buy every Buddy Rich book, you know, Realistic Rock, Stick Control, all the famous books, and sit down and just read through those and practice all the time, you know. And I was like you, where I was told early on that I was supposed to be on clarinet and bass clarinet, and they didn't want a girl on the drum line.
Of course.
So my dad went up there and threw a fit because the guy didn't know I'd been playing since I was like 3,
Right.
And so I ended up settling on clarinet and saxophone. Well, now I thank the instructor for that because now I can read melody lines and I can play multiple instruments. But at the time, I was really a little hurt by that. So I would sit, and my dad had a drum room, and I would just lock myself in and practice nonstop until one day, several years later, the instructor saw me playing. And then he's like, maybe we'll move you into pep band and you can play the drum set, And when it comes down to drums, it's just like, the one thing that I love about teaching is the fact that, and I take on a lot of the little kids. And I was a music school dropout. I didn't think I would be a great teacher. But what I found was I was a great teacher, and I actually really loved it. So I started doing that on the side. And then one day I got a phone call, and they said, would you take on an autistic student? And so I said, sure, why not? So I took an autistic student on, and I wanted to tell you this because I know you'll love this story. When I first got this kid, he would shake. He couldn't hold his drumsticks really well. He had lots of physical impairments. His movements were very awkward and slow. And so then I kept working with him, just basic stuff. And I kind of developed my own curriculum depending on the student. After about a year of teaching this kid, I noticed all these changes in his body. He no longer shook when he held his hands. He had busted through all these physical impairments that he had, and his mother completely was like, it's the drum lessons. What else could it be? And not only that, but he had all this confidence all of a sudden. Like, he was a shy kid, but because he could achieve drum patterns, then his confidence soared. So I asked the mother, I said, can I start to video these lessons? And this is about 10 years ago. And she said, absolutely can. So I videotaped him in a 2-year process.
Wow.
To show the difference. And then at the time, nobody had really studied how drumming affects autism. And then after that, I took on a student that was mute, who couldn't speak, but somehow we were able to communicate through music. And she is still drumming today, and I took on adults with brain cancer, fibromyalgia. I started taking on all these students that had all these issues, and I have seen drumming literally change their lives. And I kept saying, the world has to see this, So I started making the videos, and that's why I did it, was literally to show the world via YouTube that the process that happens and how therapeutic it can be and how healing it can be. Because I like to look at drumming, gave me a sense of, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, or it's a God-given talent, and this is what I should do to help students, help break those barriers and maybe find the confidence that they might not always have. Of course, when I was growing up in the country, I knew who Karen Carpenter was, and I knew who Sheila E. was. I had not yet discovered Viola Smith, and then Cindy Blackman Santana came out with Lenny Kravitz.
Right.
So I was really influenced by a lot of the female drummers. Of course, I love the male drummers. I'm a huge Gad head, and Steve Smith, and all the classic. Dom, I love him. Love your work, love Purdy. All the classics. I've tried to get books and study as much as possible. Sure. But yeah, I was just fascinated, by female drummers, and the fact that I even got that cover was crazy. All my idols were, on the bottom, and I was like, this is, but yeah, it just kind of blew my mind. And I kept saying, what I'm seeing, I need the world to see, because I'm seeing it firsthand as a teacher. And I would love for more universities to do studies on drumming and how it affects autism, or how it affects lots of other things. I'm really big into the healing hurts. And so, Daniel, I'm also a huge fan. I have to ask you about your grip, because, we could talk grip and technique all day, as well as gear.
Yes.
But in your videos, and I'm always curious, I know you're a left-handed player, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you hold your sticks left-hand traditional, or is it just the video flip that happens?
No, I am a completely, some people would say backwards, but I like to say opposite,
Opposites. Yeah.
reverse. Yes. Which has less of a negative connotation than backwards, because backwards is sort of like somebody's uneducated or
Yeah.
ignorant or something like that.
It's like West
So,
Virginia. No, I'm totally joking.
but
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So I, whenever a kid or a person decides they want to play the drum set, they got to
Yeah.
sort of make a decision about how they're going to set things up. And for most drummers, it's not even anything to decide. They just sit down at a
Yeah.
typical set, which is set up for right-handed people, where the hi-hat is on the right, bass drums play with the, hi-hat's on the left, bass
Yeah.
drums play
Right.
with the right foot. But for me, I was left-handed and everything I did left-footed. And so when it came time to play drum set, I tried things a couple different ways. When I got my first drum set, I tried it a couple different ways, and I just found that setting up, quote unquote, left-handed was the way for me. Just like everything else I did, I was a natural lefty. And interestingly, one of my very first drum heroes, when I was about 9 years old, I got turned on to very heavy rock. This is sort of mid 70s, the first four bands that I actually had a best friend who was 12 and I was only 9. So that's a pretty big age difference. So he was already way more into adult kinds of activities, so to speak,
Yeah.
than I as a 9-year-old was. But we listened to a lot of music, and he turned me on to Aerosmith, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, and Pink Floyd. And
Oh,
those are
all
the
the greats.
4 bands that I just fell in love with as far as the harder sounds go.
Mm-hmm.
So Ian Pace, Deep Purple was my favorite, and I was always listening to the album Made in Japan, which was their live album from like 1972, 73. And on the cover, I noticed that the way the drummer was set up was the opposite way from the way everybody else set up. So that sort of gave me permission, I guess, to like embrace my left-handedness. So when I was in high school, I played in marching band, and I played traditional grip. We had to play traditional grip. I was on the snare line, and I played it the way everybody else does, where the traditional was in my left hand.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got out of music school and started studying with Freddie Gruber, since I was a left-handed drum set player, I said, well, Freddie, can you teach me to play traditional grip in my right hand, the opposite hand?
Yeah.
And Freddie said, yeah. So in a way, it was actually better because I had a lot of really bad hand technique. I never really thought much about my hand technique like a lot of people. I just sort of picked up the sticks and I played and I practiced and learned rudiments and played in bands and stuff, but I never really looked at the technique, and no one ever really explained it to me. And when I got with Freddie, all of a sudden it was like a complete revelation in terms of just getting to a whole new level of understanding about the technique, both in the hand and the feet. And what was hard was that I had to kind of undo, I don't like to say bad habits, but I wasn't playing as effectively and as economically and ergonomically as I should have been. Let's put it that way. And I would say that most drummers don't. Most drummers could be doing things in a way that makes their life a lot easier, right?
Right.
Tension and, most quote-unquote grip problems relate to we're either squeezing too hard or wrapping too much or twisting or bending our arms in weird ways, and then putting all that tension into hitting. We just gob ourselves up. We stop ourselves from, that fluidity that actually, if we did stuff without sticks, would come naturally. As soon as we get those pieces of wood in our hand, we get all bent and twisted.
Yeah.
So Freddie really helped to outline a lot of that and helped me to kind of unwind and undo a lot of that to the point where I was, obviously it made the world of difference. I'd already been playing for 15 years, and all of a sudden I felt like I was starting from scratch. So when I teach my private students online, mostly that's what they come to me for, is to really dive very, very deep with the hand technique. But with the left hand, what was cool, or rather I should say the right hand, learning traditional grip for me was actually easier because I had never done that with that hand before,
Right.
So all these very weird outside of the box exercises that I originally learned from Freddie, and now I've kind of taken and tweaked and utilized in my own practice. That stuff, that grip actually I learned it much faster, even though we're talking over a period of time. It wasn't
Yeah.
2 weeks or anything. But it was, so yes, the answer to your question is yes. I am a full lefty, a complete lefty. I
Yeah.
do everything the reverse or opposite from the way a right-handed drummer would do it.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's nothing different about it. It's all the same principles. It's just
right.
like there's a mirror,
Well, I love to watch your technique and your grip because I think it's fascinating and it's so clean and just great. You know what I mean? And I've worked on my technique and grips for years and learning the different styles grip.
Yeah.
I actually started traditional. So I played traditional very well. And then it wasn't until I started playing like rock and roll music in my teens that I switched over to more of a match grip kind of thing.
Sure.
But you and my dad relate in another way because when he started out, before he really knew what he was doing, he played traditional, the opposite sticking, just like you do.
Yeah.
And instead of holding the traditional stick in the left, he held it in the right.
Oh wow! Even though he was right-handed.
Even though he was right-handed, and then he went to audition for band one day. He loves to tell the story, and the professor was like, "Are you left-handed?" And he said, "No, I'm right." And he goes, "Well, then you need to switch the sticks, to this grip." And so he did, but he can still play a little bit of both. Well, other than that, I've heard that story my whole life. I had never seen another drummer until you play that way, and it was out of my realm of concept that actually could be a thing.
It's really interesting. I was going to say, if to all the left-handers out there, they already know this, but I always try to speak to right-handers because, in a way, being a left-handed drummer is a bit of prejudice there. That if you've never experienced it, it's kind of like being a woman drummer.
Yeah.
There's always this kind of underlying, oh, but you're a woman, and for some reason that has to somehow be part of the conversation when we should all just be drummers, right?
Drummers, right?
So it's a little bit similar, for left-handed drummers, where we sort of run into discrimination at various points along the way. People don't understand what we do or why we do it, and they're not very accepting. Say you want to sit in on a jam session or on somebody else's drums, we have to move some things around, and that's always a big hassle. For me, when I moved to New York, people on Broadway, doing Broadway shows and stuff, I looked into that for a quick minute when I first moved to New York City, although it's not really my vibe, and I've been actually quite happy that I'm not doing any shows.
Yeah.
Make a great living and work a ton without having to do that. But
right.
But if you're a left-handed drummer, most of the Broadway drummers are right-handed, and every Broadway show has a main drummer and they have 5 subs. So there's no way for a lefty to even get into that system unless they learn how to play, the other way, which is what I told people I would do. I said, I'll learn your show on a right-handed drum set.
Yeah.
Never came to that, and I'm kind of glad because it would have been a lot of extra work, although I would have benefited from it. But it's interestingly, when I studied with Freddie Gruber, he would not let me turn around the drum set for the first few years I studied with him. And so I had to practice all my exercises, both on the right and on the left side when I went back, which was hard.
I would think that would make you very diverse, though. That's probably what helped a lot.
I hope that brought with it some alternate benefits and things,
Yeah. But I have a funny story about I got hired to play as the house drummer at Michigan Women's Music Festival for the past 5 years that it ran. Yes, which meant I got to network with all these amazing players, from everybody from the Ani DeFranco to the Indigo Girls to Melissa Farrick. And I got to play with a lot of great players. I mean, all styles too. I got to play with a hip hop artist, Medusa, out of LA, that Redman made all of her beats from Wu-Tang Clan. And they threw me on this last minute gig by this lady named Chris Williamson, who had one of the first LGBT records ever in the history of music called The Changer and the Changed. And she was demanding that I play a set with her, and I didn't know any of her music, but they were like, no, you're just going to show up. There'll be a drum set there. They're going to be rolling within 5 minutes that you show up, and boom, just improv, right? Which I love to improv. I've always been a jam bander, and I sit in rooms by myself and just play all the time. without a band. So I was like, okay. So they cart me over there. I'm late. They're already starting the show, and we're talking about in front of about 10,000 women. I get up there, and the drum set is set up opposite like you play.
Oh.
And
Wow.
I had never played a kit, so I was like,
and you had to play it that way.
Literally on the spot. I had to rework my brain and go, wait, now my left is my kick, my right is my hat, my hands are all kinds of weird. I made it through. I stumbled kind of through, but you know, it wasn't the easiest thing. And I have a lot of lefty students, and I always leave it up to them how they want to set up their kit, how they really want to hold their sticks. You know what I mean? So
sure.
I literally have about 50% of my clients are lefties.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And I think, you know, in a way, kind of as with women drummers, hopefully the glass ceiling, or whatever you want to call it, the discrimination, the ignorance factor is falling away for lefties.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm always a big advocate, but I always tell people, a lot of people come to me, well, I sort of can go do this way or this way. What should I do? I feel like it might be better for me to be lefty, but some people are encouraging me not to, you know. And I just say, like, if you're going to do it, you know, then you better be prepared for the slings and arrows, you know, that you're going to be facing, because there will be slings and arrows, and you're going to be, you know, when you fly your lefty flag out there, you're going to have to deal with some crap, and there might be some issues in your career, you know, even, or
especially I would think like showing up where you're sharing a kit kind of thing. I mean, that might be.
If there are different shows where you're sharing a kit, or for high school students, if you're in jazz band and all the other drummers are righty and you're a lefty, you know, and sometimes people just don't want to deal with you. They just don't want to be bothered, even though we all know it takes 2 seconds, you know, to fuck around. Thankfully, I've always had people that were encouraging and weren't bothered that I, you know, wanted to turn the drums around. But it's definitely, you know, it's a bit of an issue. And what makes me mad is sort of, and I have a podcast all about this topic.
Oh, cool.
And, you know, is the indignation of people who can't be bothered to watch your videos, right? So I have some very successful videos. I think my most successful YouTube video is about 850,000.
Nice.
And you think, great, and people are really supportive and totally excited about it and all that. And then, but a ton of the comments are just people like, I can't watch this. This gives me a headache. I better get my mirror, you know. Really? A lefty? Or is there something wrong with my camera? Is the camera backwards? You know, like, it's just people think for a minute, you know. And what I always say is, look, lefty drummers, I spend my life automatically reversing everything that I see. When I watch a drummer, I don't even think about it. I know exactly what their right hand is doing, what their left foot is doing, and I just make the switch. When I'm teaching my students, you know, what's actually what I was telling you earlier is that being a lefty, the advantage to online teaching is that the way you're set up opposite the person, doing it on the other hand, makes it like a mirror image. So it's actually a better way to learn, because both sides are going up and down at the same time, you know, or whatever. And exercises. So I've just gotten used to, as a lefty, when I lift my right hand, talking about teaching traditional grip, I just say my left hand. I don't even think about it. I'm lifting my right, but I just say my left. Yeah. And so that for them, the experience is seamless. You know what I mean? So, you know, and one of my favorite quotes of all time is, everyone says, well, yeah, you know, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, that's what an amazing dance team. And then until you realize that Ginger Rogers did everything that Fred Astaire did, but she did it backwards and in heels. Right? You know? And that's one of my favorite quotes, because she had to add a whole nother layer of at least like mental configuration into it. When they're, you know, leading with right, left, right, you know, and all the footwork and everything for them. And so, you know, that's what we do as lefty drummers. We just automatically, like, if I look at a transcription, all the rights and the left, I have to reverse all those. You know, if I'm going to play it on a drum set or whatever. Or if I'm playing traditional grip and I'm working on a pad, then I got to reverse all the stickings to make sure that that whatever hand is leading or the flam, that both hands are involved with are doing that. So we just do it automatically. And it irks me when people are just real lazy about it and they just want the whole world to be delivered to them on a silver platter without having to think at all. And it's like, but c'est la vie. We all deal with these kind of things,
Yeah, c'est la vie. I love that.
Everybody's in some misunderstood group or another, or discriminated against group in one way or another. And, at the end of the day, it hasn't stopped me at all.
Yeah. I had a couple little notes about a few things that you said. One, I always was encouraged in high school marching band to play in front of a mirror. And to watch, and I encourage my students to do that too, because as same thing you're talking about, it gives you a different perspective to watch yourself.
Exactly. I like to say it allows you to see yourself the way the world sees you.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to evaluate what you're doing.
What you're in, it's like sitting behind a drum set. You hear it one way, but as soon as you step out front of that drum set, it sounds completely different.
In the shuffles course that I just launched, this free shuffles course, I talk about, I mention it right in the first video. I'm left-handed. This is why it looks the way it does. And actually it's an advantage. So you'll get used to it in about 2 seconds.
Yeah, I love that. I was interviewing Tammy Mitchell-Woods, who started the Drummer Girls United group on Facebook, which is the largest female women drumming group online.
Awesome.
And I forget how many countries we're representing right now, but it's like 90 different countries are represented in there. And I've been able to network with women across the world and teach beginners across the world. It's been really nice for me.
That's awesome.
Then, in the same day, I interviewed Mindy Albowitz-Monk, who started Tom Tom Magazine, which I love her, and she's done a lot for women drummers too. So I'm great.
Yeah, I've met Mindy a few times.
Mindy's cool as hell, and I love Mindy.
Yeah.
I've been doing a couple of their online lessons for their Instagram. They're starting to work on their Instagram TV, and they're having female drummers teach different things. So I'm helping with that. But they were talking about the differences in the groups online too. Like, let's just take Facebook, for example. Some of the women felt like, they would post in more of a male-oriented group. And then, and I've gotten this too. I'll post and, nobody knows each other's backgrounds. None of us know how long each other have been playing unless you're on a platform or we've really studied you. And but if I posted the same video in the Drummer Girls United, it was nothing but praise and accolades. It was like a whole different thing. And now they're finding, again, the confidence, the courage to do that,
No, that's great. I don't know if you know this. I wrote a 4-part series for Drum Magazine back in about 2012. Somewhere around there. It was a long time ago. 4-part series about women drumming. It's not as in-depth as those books, but the idea was it's like my main, and you probably know Kelly Ray Tubbs, right?
Oh, I love Kelly Ray. I call Kelly Ray. Okay, so I'm great friends with her because I'm really close to Nashville and done a lot of work out of there. But I told her the other day, I said, "You remind me of the female Daniel Glass," and she goes, "We're great friends." Yeah, she
became a Skype student of mine years ago.
Yeah.
And during the course of us working together on her drumming, she left her job and is now full-time playing drums and has done all this cool touring stuff. And we're working on a book project together. And we've done some stuff because she's gotten involved in different women in drumming events and things. And and we're working on a cool project. So the point of all this that I was going to say about this 4-part series is that what I learned is that women have actually been out there and playing drums in much greater numbers than anybody really ever realized.
Right.
It's just that we were not paying attention,
Right.
And so now the world is paying much more attention, especially in the last few years. It's just been amazing.
Yes, I agree. There's women drummers from everywhere.
Yeah, and there's much more respect, which is great. But what Kelly and I are going to do in this project is look at the historical aspect of that and find just as many, all these examples of women drumming, which we have in what are called photographic postcards.
Oh, I love that.
Basically, it's going to be a cool project. It's just, taking us forever to get it done because
I met her in Nashville back in September on my birthday because we are in a women drummers documentary together on gender roles.
Yes. Oh, yeah. You went to the launch of that.
Yeah, and I had to sit on the panel with Dan Schinder and
cool.
a lot of the really cool people. Yeah. I was going to tell you that it is fascinating if you do go back and read that women history book, because there were so many things that I didn't even know myself. But it wasn't up until, I think, and I probably have the dates wrong, probably around the 1400s, 1500s, the church ended up banning women from playing drums. And from that moment on, it was mostly considered a masculine instrument.
One of the very interesting things that I learned, obviously we all know about Drumeo. You know about Drumeo, but
I love Drumeo, yeah.
One of the amazing things that they managed to do, they were really the first big digital drumming entity out there developing this whole thing, and they've done it in such an amazing way.
Yeah.
But what they did was they went out and they found all the people who didn't know who Neil Peart was, who didn't know what modern drummer was. They were people that were I've always wanted to play drums. I'm going to get a drum set, but I don't know what to do. So I'm going to just put in drums, or drum lessons or whatever. Drumeo successfully, or I wanted to play when I was a kid. My parents wouldn't let me. Now I've had my own family. My kids are out of the house or they're older, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And drumming is that thing. Mm-hmm. And a ton of this sort of demographic that everyone else either ignored or just didn't even know was out there, because Drumeo marketed them and found them. And so Drumeo every summer has these VIP weeks, it's like a camp. And I was a guest instructor one year, so I went out there for 5 days and worked with about 15 people. And I would say half of the students were women.
Awesome.
And it's just it's mind-boggling, to think. To put two and two, but that's how many women are part of their of their community.
Yeah.
So, I think it's all good and it's all positive, and we're moving forward in all those.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will say that probably about 80% of the students that I take on are female students, young to old. And, and it's always fascinating to me nowadays to see how many there are. I've networked as much as possible. I don't know if you just saw it, but Facebook contacted Drummer Girls United and asked them if for International Women's Day, if they would do a video. So they picked, and I'm going to interview Sharon Ransom later on today. She got picked to be the main female in the video, and it's coming across all your TV commercials, not just online. It's now all over, and because of that, Remo's now endorsing her, Zildjian.
Awesome.
It changed her life. Yeah. So
that is so awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
It was pretty cool that Facebook contacted them, because they thought, what could be cooler than women drummers, on International Women's Day. So Daniel, I kind of want to wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah, I need to also. I got a student at 11:30.
Yeah, same. So I wanted to just let everybody know, if they're wanting to find you online, if they want to watch your videos, if they want to attend your shuffle class, where do they go?
Well, I would say danielglass.com. As I mentioned, right on the front page is a link to go to the Shuffles course, 100% free right now. So I highly recommend anybody who wants to finally crack down on their shuffles, and you should check it out too. As a teacher.
I'm definitely gonna go. I'm a student first, teacher second.
Yeah, there's a lot of technique stuff in there, which is like, how do you get your shuffle to flow easily and smoothly? What are the exercises? Not just play this or play that.
Yeah,
and even talking about the pulse, just getting it to have the right feel, which is a lot of what I like to talk about. So
the double shuffle is always probably my toughest. I can achieve it, but it never feels like it's actually 100% correct.
Yeah. It's a toughie. So that's the best way. I also just want to point out to people right now, while we're sitting around at home looking for stuff to do, that I have a podcast. And if they again go to my website, there's a podcast tab. I have a show which is part of Drummers Resource, which you probably know is like the biggest drumming podcasting entity.
Yes.
every few shows is a Daniel Glass show on Drummer's Resource. But if they go to my website and click the podcast tab, they can look at all my podcasts. And I have a ton of amazing stuff, technique stuff, motivation. I'm about to drop a podcast about how do we pick ourselves up off the floor and move forward right now, and how to, get motivated, and what should our headspace be, because so many people have just been, in a dark place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know myself personally, I lost probably 100 gigs that I had booked, thousands and thousands of dollars in income just wiped away, and may not come back, So, that's why I've been working so hard to pivot towards the digital and online course and all that kind of stuff, that realm.
Yeah. At a time like this, it's really incredibly hard, and I feel bad for all my musicians, and I lost a lot of gigs too, but thank goodness teaching was more my moneymaker.
Exactly.
So the gig didn't really hurt me that bad, but at the same time, I think right now is a time to hone in on our craft, to practice more, to learn more.
That's for
to
sure.
Create.
But just also like a headspace thing. How can we pivot? How can we, look for another way? Whatever it is that we do, how can we, how can we adjust? I like that term, pivot, because I've been in this business for 30 years now. I know you've been in this business your whole life, pretty much. But it is. Times happen, things happen. Maybe you get in a project, you get on a tour, you're doing a thing, and everything's going really well, and you're making good money, you got good gigs. All of a sudden, that goes away. What do you do? How do you, adjust?
I was going to say, I call it hustling, because you got to be a hustler if you want to be a professional musician.
Absolutely.
You kind of have to have your hand in lots of different hats.
Exactly. And it's about just getting up in the morning and finding the energy to keep hustling, which is not easy to do, as you know. Some days you're like, I don't want to get online and post a bunch of crap on Facebook and beg people for likes, or, whatever, or promote some stupid gig that,
right.
Gig is stupid, but just, having to do all that. And, so anyway, I do have a podcast tab on my website on the main menu, so people can check that out. And there's a lot of stuff there. And Jyn, it's been great.
Thank you. You're one of my favorite drummers, and I definitely will take your shuffle class, because I love that. And maybe one day a lesson from you, because I love to take lessons too. I'm a student.
We'll do it
always.
On Skype.
All right. Cool. Have a great day, and thank you so much for being on LRS102.com.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right. You take care, Daniel.